Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here at the Center for Birds of Prey in Charleston, South Carolina on our Facebook live video stream. And today we have a really fun topic to get the chance to talk about. We're going to introduce you here to our newest member of the education team here at the Center for Birds of Prey. This is a just over 2-week-old Eurasian eagle owlet. But before we get started diving into all of the information we have to talk about today, I just wanted to say hello to everyone. Please feel free to chime in at any point during this video. If you have questions, let us know where you're coming from as well. We'd love to hear from you and hope you are enjoying your day. Now, here at the center, we do have a propagation program, which means that we breed birds in captivity. And there are a couple of reasons why we might breed birds here at the center and why captive breeding is important. The first one is actually why this bird was bred. He was bred to be utilized as an education ambassador. By breeding birds here at our facility, we're able to utilize these birds for educational programs, as well as we are able to trade and sell these birds with other facilities just like ours. He, of course, doesn't want to turn around. There we go. Another reason, though, to breed birds in captivity is that it's a great way to help to boost wild populations in the potential event that something might happen to those populations. And so captive breeding and reintroduction programs have been utilized and helped to boost species like the peregrine falcon right here in the United States when their numbers declined. By captively breeding these birds and releasing them back into the wild, they were able to boost those populations. So a lot of great ways to do this. By this bird, for instance, so he was bred here at the Center for Birds of Prey and actually hatched out on March 10th of just this year. So this bird is 15 days old right now. And chicks, they undergo a variety of challenges, especially right off the bat. Now, the first challenge for this chick was actually hatching out of an egg. And to show you what that looked like, I have brought this bird's actual egg that it hatched out of, again on the 10th. So just to show you a nice size comparison there as well. When this chick hatched, he weighed only about 55 grams in size. Now, I do keep using the term he, and we're just basing that guess based on the size of this bird at this point. It's really hard, though, to tell the sex of a bird, especially while they're rapidly developing. But based on this bird's growth and development so far, we're guessing male because it's a little smaller than what a female would be of this age. But again, first challenge for a chick is hatching out of an egg. And you can imagine this is a pretty grueling process. But one of the tools that this bird had to actually help him to get out of an egg is actually something that you can still see right there on the tip of this chick's beak. That white dot right there, that is actually something called an egg tooth. That bird actually used that calcified projection on the tip of its beak to help to sever the blood vessels and then eventually to help to crack out of that egg. Now that that egg tooth doesn't have a function anymore, it will here shortly fall off, but it does remain for the time being. Now, once the chick makes it out of the egg, the next challenge for them is actually to be able to maintain their own body temperature or thermoregulate. You might notice right now that this chick is covered in a lot of fluffy down feathers. Those down feathers right now are a grayish brown color, but they started off very white in coloration. And those feathers are there specifically to help this bird to be able to maintain his own body temperature. When he hatched out, he actually had very few down feathers on him, and therefore he had a hard time maintaining that temperature. And so normally what would happen is one of the parents would actually continue to sit on top of them and do something called brooding them, helping them to keep warm. Now, if one of your parents has to sit on top of you 24/7 or 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, until you can grow those down feathers, that bird can't be doing something really important to your survival. Does anybody have a guess what that something might be? It would be to be able to feed you. So if you only have one parent out hunting, it's going to be a big challenge to be able to support a growing chick. And this bird right now is eating about 8 mice a day, just for this chick right here. And so you can imagine that having just one parent doing all of that hunting can be really tricky for them. And so the faster this chick grew all of those down feathers, the faster he was able to maintain his own body temperature, and then would be able to allow both parents to go out and hunt to help to support him. So this bird is just now at 15 days old, really finishing up that first challenge. You might notice though, I want to draw some attention to some bare patches of skin here on this bird. We'll see if we can't see some of those. You might notice that those feathers do grow in tracks or lines that are actually attached via muscles. And so while you might move around a little bit, you might notice that there are a lot of bare patches there. Those patches are something called apteria, and they will actually remain bare for this bird's entire life. You just don't see them on the adult birds because those feathers, those down feathers, and then the adult feathers will grow over top of them. So a nice look though to what the actual skin and feather growth of a bird might be. If you're interested in checking more of that out, if you have something like a whole turkey or chicken at your house, look for those lines that you might see of where those feathers grew. Now we said for this bird that first challenge was to grow all of these down feathers. The second challenge for this chick is actually to get to full body size as quickly as possible. Once he does that, he's able to best thermoregulate because he has the perfect surface area to body temperature ratio. And so right now this bird is undergoing rapid growth. Again, I said on the 10th of March, just 15 days ago, this bird weighed 55 grams. This morning, this chick actually weighed about 620 grams. So that's over 10 times this bird's growth rate there. Pretty incredible. And he will continue to develop. Eurasian eagle owls are actually the second largest species of owl in the world. And this bird will top out at maybe between about 3 pounds and maybe 6 pounds or so in body mass, and will end up having about a 6-foot wingspan. So just shows you all the growing that this chick still has left to do. All right, now he's enjoying some of the sunshine and the warmth that we have here today. But again, rapid growth happening for this bird. Now, once they get to full body mass, there's another challenge that they have to overcome. Let's see if you can't maybe guess what that third challenge is. We already said that this bird hatched out of an egg and grew all those fluffy down feathers. Then it's going to get to full body size. What's that last challenge? Any guesses? Audrey back here, she's manning the phone and the camera and trying to look at all of those guesses. Great to have all of you on board. The last challenge that this chick has to actually overcome is actually growing in those adult feathers before it can fledge and leave the nest and be on its own. And so once this bird gets to that full body size, what he's going to start doing is growing some of those adult feathers out of those same exact spots where these down feathers are. It will just push those down feathers out and actually start to grow in some of those adult and those flight feathers. You might see that there are some feathers developing. You might see them coming out there on the wings. And those feathers, actually when they grow, they'll have a blood supply to them. There's something called a blood feather. And that blood supply is bringing nutrients to that feather as it develops. Once the feather is fully developed, that blood supply would recede. So if you ever go outside and you see a feather on the ground, you might pick it up and look at it, and you might notice that the shaft of that feather is actually hollow. That's where that blood supply was originally as that feather was developing. And so when those feathers are developing, you can imagine growing all of your feathers at once. It takes a lot of energy to do so. But those feathers can be very sensitive. And we here at the center have to be very careful with those. Because if one of those feathers, when it was developing, those blood feathers, were to break, they might actively bleed. And that could be hazardous to their health. And so, again, a lot of challenges that these chicks have to overcome in a very short time frame. I've talked all about those challenges. Let's talk a little bit about the timing. Again, this bird is already over 600 grams at just over 2 weeks old. This bird will get to full body size by about 8 weeks or so in age. And then once he's at that full body mass, start growing in those flight feathers. So we're talking maybe 10 to 12 weeks before this chick is fully flighted. But we'll be certainly doing a lot of moving around and hopping well before that.
Yeah, not necessarily a question, but learning to fly.
Oh, we have a great question about learning to fly. One of the things we like to point out here at the center is that there are certain things that a bird needs to be able to do potentially every single day, and they need to do those things even if their parent might not be the best teacher. And so a lot of those things tend to be instinct. For this bird, I should mention, again, this bird hatched out right here at the center. I'll see if I can't get him to maybe flip around here so you can see the front end. And this bird hatched out here at the center, and we knew that we wanted to utilize this bird for education purposes. And for an owl to know that they are an owl, they actually have to almost think that they should hang out with us. And so right now what we are actually doing with this bird is we are intentionally imprinting this bird on people. So this is not something you would ever want to do for the birds in your backyard. This bird hatched out in captivity, and so when he hatched out, normally an owl would open their eyes. For this bird, it happened at about 10 days old, and opening their eyes, he would see his mom and dad feeding him. Mom and dad eagle owl, typically, and would know, therefore, that he was an eagle owl. Instead, this bird saw people, us feeding him, and therefore he actually thinks he should associate with us. That's going to make him much more comfortable doing this job for the rest of his life. And for a Eurasian eagle owl in captivity, that could be about 40 years. So we want him to be as comfortable as possible. That being said, can I teach this bird how to fly? I'm not good at flying, right? That's not something I'm capable of doing. And so for this bird, whew, a little bug there. For this bird, flight is something that's instinctual. It's built in. This bird will certainly have to build a lot of body mass and muscle mass before doing it, but it is something this bird will figure out all on his own. It'll start off, which is what's happening right now, with some sitting up and a little bit of shuffling and walking. And then we'll start to see some flapping happening to build those muscles that are necessary for flight. Then we might even see some short hops happening, and eventually those hops will build into some shorter flights. So flight is all something that is instinct for them.
I had a question about looking at the feet a little more closely.
Question about looking at the feet? Absolutely. Let's see if I can't spin this bird around one more time. This bird has been with me all 15 days and tends to turn to the sound of my voice there. But take a look at those feet. Again, Eurasian eagle owls are the second largest species of owl in the world. These are large predatory birds. Here in North America, our equivalent to this bird would be our great horned owl. But Eurasian eagle owls, as their name suggests, are native to Europe and Asia. And you might notice this bird's feet are fairly large compared to his size. He is going to have extremely large feet, and those feet are built for catching a lot of small mammals. So things like rats, maybe even something up to a rabbit or even a skunk in size is the potential. These larger owls, they tend to be very opportunistic. So we'll grab just about anything they can get those feet on. And you might notice when looking at those feet, you might see something on the tops of his toes. You might have noticed that this bird has feathers on the tops of his toes. That is actually an owl characteristic. Those feathers that you see there will help to protect those toes from the bites of their prey. You can imagine something like a small mammal, a rodent like a rat or a mouse. They have extremely sharp teeth and those and very powerful jaws, and those bites could leave this bird with an injury. It certainly might not kill him outright, but could lead to a potential infection. And so those feathers offer protection from the bites of their prey. They also offer some insulation, helping to keep their feet warm and even help them to fly silently, which I'm sure we'll get into on another live stream episode about the silent flight of owls.
Quick question, Chihuahua, is that a size of an animal for an Eurasian eagle owl?
Great question. Would a Chihuahua be a potential prey for a bird like a Eurasian eagle owl? Even Chihuahuas are fairly large in size compared to these birds. Again, Eurasian eagle owls are females that we tend to fly here at the center. We fly them at about 4.5 or 5 pounds. So even a Chihuahua tends to outweigh them. And for the most part, these birds, they're going to go after the smallest prey they can to be able to survive. The smaller the prey, the less risk of injury to them. Chihuahuas, just like those rodents, have very sharp teeth and can inflict a significant bite on their feet. And so they're not going to go after them unless it's absolutely necessary. Sometimes maybe a pair has hungry chicks to feed. They might have to catch sometimes those larger food items. And so if you're worried about your small dog, maybe a Chihuahua or even something like a cat, what I always recommend is that you just stick close to them. Your presence as a human, you're a big, scary predator, and therefore your presence tends to deter those predators from coming in.
Great, we have another question about...
Fantastic, another question.
About falconry licenses and whether you have to have a falconry license in order to have a propagation program, or can you do it under an education permit?
Audrey's going to take the role on this since she does all of our permitting, so I'll let her answer from behind the phone, but that's a great question on the permitting process that goes into this.
So you do have to have permits in order to do captive propagation, and it's not. It's actually its own permit that you have to apply for throughout U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So it's not a falconry license or an education permit. It's its own separate one, and that you would have to apply for.
Fantastic. Let's see here. Well, as we're sitting here, I do want to point out one other thing, since you're getting a lot of good looks at this and it's fun to see at this age. I want to point out something that's going on right back here. You might see something that looks almost like a Hershey kiss back there. And what you are seeing right above the tail, that is something called the Europygial gland. That is actually the preen gland. It secretes an oil that these birds would actually turn their beak, rub it on that Europygial gland to get some of those oils on their beak, and then rub on their feathers and to help to maintain them, to help with waterproofing as well. And for the most part, when you're looking at a bird, it's really tricky to get to see that. But since this bird just has those down feathers, it's a nice look to the Europygial gland. Even as a small bird, they still maintain that gland. Fantastic. Well, what I'm going to do, feel free to keep those questions coming, but you have caught us here right in the middle of lunchtime for this bird.
Why so chattery?
You might notice the noise that he's been making. Some of that is a food bag. This bird is currently begging a little bit for food. Right now we are feeding this chick 4 times a day. I feed him when I wake up in the morning, around lunchtime, around dinner time, and then before I go to sleep. So he's getting 4 meals currently, and again, eating about 8 mice a day. But what he's eating is just some cut up pieces of mouse right now. This mouse does contain fur. And so what you might notice, again, the size of this bird's mouth is pretty incredible right now, even for such a young animal. But what would typically happen is those parents would bring a food item back to the nest, and actually one of them would actually rip those food items into smaller pieces and then feed it to the young. So what I've done here is I've actually just cut up some mice today. I am just feeding him using some hemostats to kind of simulate that process, as well as for me not to have to touch any of it. But just a little bit of meal time here today. What this bird once he eats, what he actually has right now in his stomach is some of casting material. This bird has actually not yet cast his first pellet. Some of you might have dissected something like an owl pellet before in school. It's just a big ball, usually of fur or feathers and bones from the animals that they eat, because they actually cannot digest those parts. And so what they'll actually do is regurgitate those parts. For a typical bird, it will be within about 24 hours of the time they eat that meal, about 12 to 24 hours. But this bird is just now getting some casting material. So he's getting a lot of those bones that are in the mice, as well as the fur. And so he actually has a fairly large casting in his stomach right now that hopefully will be coming up any day now. The first casting is always the hardest. But you might notice after he eats, he might open his mouth, kind of turn his head side to side, just kind of trying to work that up. I can imagine it's a strange feeling the first time you have to regurgitate a pellet.
How easy is it to determine the sex or gender of an owl?
Really great question. How easy is it to determine the sex of an owl? It can actually be fairly tricky. Unfortunately, owls, like a lot of the other raptors that we work with, they don't have nice plumage differences between the sexes. So males and females are monomorphic. They're identical in coloration. What we can often use, though, is actually size to help us to make a guess, with the female birds actually being larger than the males. It's something called reverse size dimorphism between the sexes. Now, I keep saying he throughout this whole entire live stream, but we actually aren't certain the sex of this bird. Based on his weight today, again, about 600 grams, I'm guessing based on that size that we are looking at a male. But it can be tricky to determine, especially when they're still rapidly growing. A lot easier to determine once they are full body size. If we really want to know, what we can do is actually send a blood sample off to a lab, and that can let us know one way or the other. So it's a fantastic question, and we might choose to do that down the road with this bird. But right now it's just fun to kind of play a little guessing game.
How soon after he eats will he regurgitate a pellet, or in general?
Great question. How soon after they eat will they regurgitate the pellets? So typically for most birds that we work with, we're talking between maybe 12 and 24 hours after they eat. Usually these birds eat one single meal each day. And so sometime after that, that pellet will be regurgitated. It all depends on the amount of casting material, though, that they might be ingesting as well. And again, for this bird, he actually hasn't cast a pellet yet. So 15 days without one. We have been increasing the amount of fur and casting materials that he is getting in his meal. But hopefully any day now. And certainly we can put up a nice post of when that first cast, that pellet comes out, because it'll be an exciting day. Fantastic. Well,
Something we didn't talk about was the band.
Oh, that's a great question. Audrey's helping to keep me on track of things that I haven't talked about today. So you might notice that this bird actually has a band on his leg right here. It is a closed band, and it actually has some letters and numbers on it that will pertain specifically to this individual. What we did, we were able to place that band over his toes about 2 days ago. And that'll help us to keep track once he is an adult, be able to tell who is who. So it's like a name tag that these birds would wear permanently, just to help to identify them, since it can be very tricky just visually looking at them to tell the difference. Other things, I guess I should mention a little bit about Eurasian eagle owls. Again, this is a species native to Europe and Asia, and actually a species that has a really interesting conservation history. They, just like the bald eagle here in the United States, were nearly wiped out of their European range. And a lot of it had to do with their size. Again, we said this is a large bird. You can imagine flying over you silently at night with a 6-foot wingspan. That can be startling. And so there was actually a lot of fear and intimidation for these birds, and they were actually persecuted because of that. They were poisoned or they were killed due to that fear and intimidation. And a lot of this happened in the early 1900s, but luckily we have learned a lot since then. And they are certainly several countries have strengthened their laws to help to protect these birds, as they're extremely important predators in their native range. And also, again, through captive breeding and reintroduction programs in those areas, they were able to bounce back in most of their European range, although they are unfortunately still extinct in certain local areas. Now, this bird right here and our Eurasian eagle owls, they actually participate in something called a species survival plan. And that means that their genes are actually recorded in a stud book. And we can actually find the best pairings for them to help to continue to increase genetic diversity in captivity, just in case things like captive breeding and reintroduction ever have to come back into play. So a really great look at captive breeding. If you're interested in learning more about captive breeding and propagation, here shortly we are going to be posting a streamable learning video on our YouTube channel. So I encourage you to stay tuned for that. You can look at all that goes into this. So this bird actually hatched out artificially in an incubator. There's a whole lot involved in managing these birds and hatching them in captivity. And so stay tuned for that. Again, you can check that out on the center's YouTube channel. And if you haven't already checked out the streamable learning on owls, I encourage you to do that, because we talk all about the unique adaptations that owls have to help them to be specialized to do a specific job.
Another question, two questions that kind of go together. When do they start eating whole mice and food, and what's the best food for a chick?
Great question. When do they start eating those whole mice, and what exactly is the best food item for a chick like this? So right now I'm feeding him mostly mice, though initially we fed a lot of mouse and chick, and we will continue to go back into feeding some day-old chicks as well. Usually a mono diet of any kind isn't always the best, and so we do try to diversify the food items that our chicks eat. There are a lot of, it all depends on the species of bird and what they might eat naturally as well. They might need specific nutrients, and we actually do supplement this food with things like calcium and a vitamin supplement to help to get this bird all the vitamins and minerals that he might need that are necessary. And as for when it starts swallowing whole mice, I'd say another couple of weeks. First of all, we want to make sure that he's continuing to process, and sometimes those larger bites can be harder to do that. And so one of the things that I do every day, besides cutting up these mice for him and feeding him, is actually doing a lot of cleanup as well. Just before we got onto this live stream, this bird went to the bathroom. It happens a lot, and we want to make sure that continues, that he's processing those food items well. And so it'll still be a couple of weeks before he'll be able to swallow those whole food items.
We're at almost 30 minutes, but we have some more questions.
Okay, we have some more questions. Fantastic.
What is a young owl's survival rate?
Great question. The survival rate for these birds. For birds as a whole, they have about a 50% mortality rate in their first year. That means about half of them don't make it to the age of 1. You can imagine for this bird, again, we talked about those challenges at the beginning of rapid development and growth. If something happens to one of your parents, maybe if there's not enough food readily available, you might not survive because you might not get enough nutrients each day. Eurasian eagle owls can oftentimes hatch 2 chicks, sometimes even 3. And so if you have 3 mouths to feed and there's not as much food available, maybe only one of you might survive. And then again, we mentioned that this bird, he's going to be full size and flighted by about 12 weeks. Might get a little bit longer parental care, maybe up to about 6 months or so of care from mom and dad Eurasian eagle owl. But after that, you're on your own. And if you aren't a skilled hunter, you might not survive. And so very high mortality rate for these birds.
Also, someone was late to the broadcast and was wondering about if we were worried about imprinting this owl.
Great question. We are actually intentionally imprinting this owl on people. This is a Eurasian eagle owl, so not a native species here in Charleston, South Carolina, but instead a bird native to Europe and Asia. And this bird actually was bred specifically here at the center to be an education ambassador. And so yes, we are intentionally imprinting this bird on people. He was never a wild bird, nor was he ever destined to be in the wild. And by imprinting him, we're going to make him much more comfortable and less stressed throughout his education career.
Also, if he hatched here, where did the egg come from?
Fantastic question. If he hatched here, where did that egg come from? We actually have this bird's parents as part of our team. And they actually laid this egg and actually one other, and unfortunately the other egg was not fertile. So only one fertile Eurasian eagle owl egg for this pair this spring. But his parents have been in our education collection for years, and so that's how we acquired that egg. Fantastic. Well, at this point, what I want to do is wrap things up. I think it's about time for this bird to just soak up some sunshine after eating that meal. And I want to say thank you so much for joining us on this live stream. If you have any questions that we haven't had the chance to answer yet, we love to hear from you. I just ask that you leave those questions in the comments and we will get back to you as soon as possible. If you're interested in more of what we do, we actually have a really fun program happening tomorrow. We are going to live stream from our avian medical clinic. So really fun look into a place that not many people get to go into. And actually, we might get to hear a little bit about a re-nesting project that just happened with some of our local owlets. So a lot of fun things happening tomorrow. Again, check in at 11:30 tomorrow. That's the 26th of March for that look into our medical facility. If you're interested again in learning more about owls, or even here in the future about propagation and breeding, check out our YouTube page and share those things as well. We love to get more followers. We love to get the word out, especially since unfortunately we can't be open right now. We want to share this with as many people as we can. So please share. And if you're interested in donating as well to the center, we are a private nonprofit and we can always use your donation to help us to do these education programs and take care of these animals, help to feed them, help to take care of the birds in our medical facility. And so check out you can check out our website. It is thecenterforbirdsofprey.org. That'll give you all the information for donation and memberships if you're interested, as well as a link to our YouTube channel. So we'd love to see you again. Looking forward to seeing you tomorrow at 11:30. Thanks and have a great day.